I'm going to take about 10 to 15 minutes of your time. I'm going to talk about debt as a structural problem that is facing Pakistan, and not just Pakistan, pretty much all and most developing countries. And this is especially pertinent in light of the floods, because the floods have really exposed how poor the rural people really are and how desperate they are. And a lot of it comes from debt. The problem of debt has become particularly acute since 1988, as you will see through the slide. I just want to offer a disclaimer. I am a lawyer, as Shahbaz said, I'm an activist. मैं इकोनॉमिस्ट नहीं हूँ, और टीचर का मकसद ये होता है कि आम इंसान, आप जैसा मुझ जैसा आम इंसान जो इकोनॉमिस्ट नहीं है, वो भी इन चीज़ों को समझ सकता है और इन चीज़ों के ऊपर गौर कर सकता है, और हम लोग सब साथ सीख रहे हैं. So I'm not here as an economist or an expert. I'm just an ordinary person with some information for you. Having said that, I'm going to go into this. So just a brief historical background of Pakistan's economic history. Talking about the Ayub period. And the Ayub period is known as the period of capitalism. Capitalist growth. The 58 से 1968 में पाकिस्तान के अंदर there was a very different type of economic growth than we see post 1988. It was a bureaucratic directed, illiberal as opposed to neoliberalism, which we see now, opening of markets. This was very protected. So as you see, the trade was highly controlled. Abhi, it's the opposite. Trade is not highly controlled over here. So it was a very controlled top-down growth. But we did see some, according to most economists like Akbar Zaidi, we did see some growth. Of course, with any capitalist growth, there are inherent conflicts, contradictions, and at the end of the youth period, we saw massive student protests. People were out on the streets, and because of the unequal growth, income disparities and inequities that became apparent, despite the fact that from a conventional point of view, we did see some growth in industry. Then we see the Bhutto period. The Bhutto period was not so well. Compared to Ayub, Bhutto period was known as some economists call it, the unlucky years. Bhutto के अंदर हम लोगों ने ये देखा कि growth जो थी वो 60s के मुकाबले में कम हो गई, लेकिन भुट्टो ने बेसिक इंडस्ट्रियल सेटअप भुट्टो छोड़ के गए, जिसकी हम लोगों ने consequences 80s में देखे. So steel mills, for example, was set up during Bhutto's time, but didn't actually become operational and profitable until the early 80s, Zia's time. So, and also like that slide previously showed, what we saw Bhutto do was a massive nationalization of industries. So massive nationalization. Next. So now Zia. Of course, Zia, as this is a popular quote that says Zia was the biggest wrongdoer who did the most harm. Zia ke andar we see economic growth, but the economic growth wasn't, as we know, weak fundamentals. So economic growth wasn't really for the people or about the people. There were various reasons for it. We did see economic growth. One of the reasons was that 1975 or 85 which meant a lot of people went to the Arab countries, UAE. There were massive amounts of remittances and the highest, record high remittances of 23.1 billion in the 1980s. We also saw a lot of money coming in because Pakistan obviously was fighting the war for the US, training Mujahideen, fighting against the Soviet Union. So we saw a lot of money coming through that as well, and that of course becomes the precedent for a lot of the problems we see today as well. And the Bhutto era, steel mills coming into operation. Under the Junejo era, in 85 to 88, we saw a small increase in the social sector. थोड़ी सी increase, 5 program जो था, those of you who remember Junejo का, उसके अंदर थोड़ी सी health और education पे हम लोगों ने अब I'm going to talk basically about the problems of debt. The problems of debt and the neoliberal era as we know it starts in 1988. Of 1988 के अंदर हम लोगों ने loans लेने शुरू किए, right? So the first major loan agreement with the IMF, the first major one was in 1980. अब fiscal deficit सबसे बड़ी चीज जो IMF कहती है, in order to be eligible for loans, right? The structural adjustment programs may require you to reduce your fiscal deficit. That's the biggest demand of the IMF and World Bank कि आप अपना fiscal revenue और expenditure का जो deficit है उसको आप कम करें. Now these are some of the conditionalities or these are some of the consequences of these structural adjustment programs. Our government then opens up the economy. So instead of trade import substitution कि आप import करने के बजाय अपनी चीजें बनाएं, you open up the economy to consumer goods from outside, and you also export a lot of your stuff, raw materials, and even cotton and sports goods are main exports outside. So we see one big consequence of that is we see a reduction in import tariffs. So instead of charging people to send their items, goods here, we are reducing them. So they've gone down in the 80s, 88, 90s, 125%. से लेके ये गिरते गए, and now in the last second term they were down to 45, and now I believe they're even further down to about 25%. So you're charging less on the goods that you got, and you're opening up your economy to goods from outside. Massive privatization. A lot of people disagree on this, but IMF instructed conditionalities involve privatization. So we are currently seeing a lot of privatizations, but this process started in 1988, where 105 manufacturing units were put up for privatization. Privatization, IMF क्यों कहता है कि privatize करो? Because they feel कि government के जो इदारे हैं ये सही तरह नहीं चल रहे. तो सबसे बड़ी argument ये होती है कि भाई ये inefficient है. And if they go into the hands of private owners, they will run more efficiently. लेकिन इसका नतीजा ये होता है कि लोगों की jobs जाती हैं और बहुत ज़्यादा unemployment बढ़ती है, जो कि बड़ी है. Efficiency का जहाँ तक ताल्लुक है, the critique that we have of this is कि अगर एक इदारा efficiently चल रहा है private हाथों के अंदर, ultimately the market is going to determine, right? It's going to ultimately be answerable to profit and the bottom line rather than generally serving the people. The other conditionalities include cuts in social spending. So we saw in 1980 the very stark figure कि हमारी 9.3 of the GDP होता था development का expenditure और वो कम होके गिरा है a low of 2.1% in 2000, and currently I believe the figure stands at around 3%. Regressive sales tax. So instead of taxing the rich, we are taxing the poor. And I don't know if some of you saw that there was an Express Tribune story जिसके अंदर लिखा था कि 35 individuals are responsible from Karachi for 17.7 billion rupees of tax evasion. So we're talking about the people at the top are not paying taxes, and the IMF imposed conditionalities are passing the tax burden onto the poor in the form of GST and VAT, value added tax and general sales tax. So you're paying more for your consumer items. Middle income and lower income people are making more of that, and money they don't have because we're looking at cuts in social spending, cuts in subsidies, right? We know that we pay more for petrol here than people are paying in the US.